The wealthy cowboy couldn't bear his loneliness. That night he invited his Apache neighbor. Samuel had always believed that having wealth meant having everything he could ever want, best. His ranch was vast, stretching over rolling hills and open plains, where the sun painted gold on the fields and shadows danced at sunset. Horses grazed freely, cattle roamed in large herds, and the barns were filled with the finest equipment money could buy. People often admired him from afar, noting the size of his land, the strength of his herd, and the shine of his homestead. Yet, despite all this, Samuel felt a hollow ache inside, a quiet loneliness that no amount of wealth could fill. Every morning Samuel rose before the sun, the chill of the early hours brushing against his face as he stepped onto the porch of his big wooden house. He could hear the distant calls of his horses and the soft rustling of the wind through the tall grass. The air was fresh and crisp, but even the beauty of nature failed to calm the emptiness he carried. He fed the horses one by one, checking each one carefully for signs of illness or injury. He gave instructions to the ranch hands, all of whom were diligent and respectful. They obeyed him without question, but they were not companions. They were workers. He had no one to share a laugh with, no one to discuss the rising sun or the colors of the sky. Samuel's days were long and structured. He inspected the fences that stretched endlessly across his land, ensuring that none were broken and that the cattle remained safe. He rode his horse from one end of the ranch to the other, the rhythmic sound of hooves against the dirt a steady companion in the quiet mornings. Sometimes he would pause on a hill, looking out at the horizon, watching the light change as the sun climbed higher. He imagined that in another life he might have had someone to share this beauty with, someone who could point out the tiny details he often overlooked, like the curve of a distant hill or the song of a morning bird. But in reality, he was alone. Afternoons were spent tending to the business side of the ranch. Samuel counted the cattle, checked accounts, and spoke with buyers and traders over the phone or in letters that arrived daily. Deals were made, money was earned, and the ranch continued to prosper. Yet each transaction left him feeling no more fulfilled than before. He had everything he could purchase, but nothing that could fill the emptiness in his heart. Evenings brought a quiet that Samuel found both peaceful and painful. The ranch hands returned to their quarters, the cattle settled into their pens, and the sky turned a soft orange before fading to deep blue. Samuel would light a fire in the stone fireplace of his large home, the crackling flames casting warm shadows across the walls. He sat alone, a cup of coffee in hand, staring into the fire. Often he found himself thinking of the family he never had, friends he never made, and conversations that never happened. He missed companionship, though he had never been willing to seek it in the past. Pride and fear had kept him isolated, and now the weight of that isolation pressed down on him heavily. On one particular evening, Samuel walked out to the porch, leaning against the railing. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like sparkling diamonds. The wind carried the faint scent of the desert, mixed with the smell of hay and earth. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the cool breeze brush across his face, and he felt the sharp sting of loneliness again. It was a different kind of ache than hunger or tiredness. It was deeper, quieter, and constant. He realized that no horse, no herd, no money could replace the human presence he longed for. Samuel thought of his neighbors, scattered families and small settlements that dotted the landscape miles away. One neighbor in particular came to his mind, Ahuli, an Apache man who lived a short distance from the ranch. Ahuli was respected in his community, known for his wisdom and quiet strength. Despeya. Samuel had seen him before, tending to his own land, caring for his animals, and moving with a calm confidence. They had exchanged brief nods and polite greetings, but nothing more. Samuel felt a strange mix of curiosity and hesitation. Could a man so different from him, different in culture and background in life, be someone he could call a friend? As night deepened, Samuel poured another cup of coffee and carried it outside again. The firelight from inside glowed softly through the windows, but it was no substitute for actual conversation. He thought about the quiet of his life, how even the wind and the distant cries of coyotes could not break the silence that had wrapped around him for so many years. He thought about what it would mean to invite someone into his home, to share a meal or a story, and the idea both excited and terrified him. Pride and fear warred within him. The fear of rejection, the fear of misunderstanding, the fear that his loneliness would remain even if he tried to reach out. For hours, Samuel sat on the porch, staring at the stars and thinking about the life he had built and the life he had missed. He thought about the time he had spent working endlessly, acquiring land, and building a legacy. And he realized that while the ranch was thriving, he had neglected the simplest, most human needs: friendship, laughter, and companionship. But the realization struck him with a quiet force, leaving him thoughtful and restless. Finally, he made a decision that surprised him. He would invite Ahuli over that night. The thought of sharing his evening with someone, of breaking the pattern of solitude, brought a small spark of hope into Samuel's heart. He stood up, feeling both nervous and determined, and began preparing a modest meal. He did not want to impress with wealth or grandeur. He wanted to connect, to offer warmth and kindness in the simplest form. He cleaned the table, laid out dishes, and brewed a strong pot of coffee, imagining the conversation that might unfold. As he worked, Samuel's mind wandered to the possibilities. Perhaps they would discuss the ranch, or the land, or the animals. Perhaps Ahuli would share stories of his own life, his people, and his traditions. Samuel imagined listening, learning, and laughing. He felt the tiniest flicker of excitement, a sensation that had long been absent from his carefully ordered life. The fire in the hearth crackled and popped, filling the room with warmth, and for the first time in years Samuel felt the edges of his loneliness soften just a little. By the time the sky was deep midnight blue, the house was ready, and Samuel stood by the door listening for the faint sound of approaching footsteps. His heart beat faster with anticipation. The wind whispered through the trees and the stars shone brightly overhead, as if encouraging him to take this small but significant step. Samuel realized that inviting someone into his life, even for a simple evening, was an act of courage. It was an acknowledgement that no matter how much he owned, what truly mattered was sharing life with another human being. As the night settled in, Samuel poured another cup of coffee, picked up a chair, and placed it near the fireplace. He stared into the flames, thinking of the possibilities the evening might bring. In the quiet of the ranch, surrounded by the vastness of his land and the depth of his solitude, Samuel felt a stirring of hope. The night was no longer just another silent stretch of time. It had become a turning point. Somewhere out there, someone might share this evening with him, and perhaps in doing so they would both find something that had been missing for far too long: connection, understanding, and the simple joy of companionship. The wind whispered softly through the plains as Ahuli tended to a small herd of goats, the quiet evening stretching before him like a painted canvas. The sky was a deep shade of purple, and stars began to appear one by one like small lanterns in the distance. Ahuli had lived in this land all his life. He knew every rock, every hill, every stream. He knew when the wind would change, when the rain might fall, and when the animals were restless. Life was simple, but it was honest and meaningful. He took pride in caring for his animals, in walking the land with patience and care, and in maintaining the traditions passed down to him from his ancestors. Ahuli had often noticed Samuel from afar. The wealthy cowboy who owned the expansive ranch next door was well known in the region. Ahuli had seen him riding across the hills, checking his cattle, speaking firmly to the ranch hands, always alert, always in control. There was a quiet confidence about Samuel, a presence that could not be ignored. Yet, Ahuli had also noticed something else, a certain loneliness in Samuel's eyes. A distance that even the beauty of his land could not fill. Sometimes Ahuli wondered what it would be like to speak to the man, to learn about the life he led, and perhaps even share a conversation under the wide open sky. That evening, as Ahuli finished rounding up his goats, he noticed smoke curling gently from the chimney of Samuel's house. The warm glow of firelight spilled onto the ground, casting shadows across the landscape. It was unusual for Samuel to be outside at this hour, and Ahuli's curiosity grew. He wiped the dust from his hands and leaned on the fence, thinking about the strange pull he felt toward the man. Ahuli had always been cautious, respecting boundaries and traditions, but something about Samuel's presence seemed different that night. As he prepared to return home, Ahuli saw movement near the gate of Samuel's ranch. The cowboy himself appeared, standing tall with a hesitant expression, his eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for someone. Ahuli's heart quickened, not with fear, but with a sense of anticipation. Samuel was signaling, perhaps hoping for a visitor. Ahuli wondered if the cowboy might actually be inviting him over. The thought was both unexpected and exciting. For a moment, Ahuli hesitated. He thought of his family, of the expectations placed on him by his community, and of the cautious respect he always maintained toward those who lived differently from him. Yet something inside told him this was a moment to embrace. Curiosity, the chance for connection, and the possibility of sharing stories with someone who seemed equally lonely, urged him forward. Taking a deep breath, Ahuli mounted his horse and began the short ride toward Samuel's homestead, the soft sound of hooves blending with the whispering wind. Samuel saw him coming from the porch, and a flicker of relief crossed his face. He had been nervous, unsure of how the evening would unfold. What if Ahuli refused? What if their conversation felt awkward or strained? But now, seeing the familiar figure approach, Samuel felt a wave of hope. He straightened his back, adjusted his coat, and prepared himself for what he hoped would be a meaningful evening. When Ahuli reached the gate, Samuel greeted him with a tentative smile. "Ahuli," he said, his voice steady but warm. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I thought perhaps you might like to join me tonight." Ahuli paused, studying Samuel's expression. There was sincerity there, a genuine longing for company that matched the quiet loneliness he had sensed before. Nodding slightly, he replied, "I would like that." The words were simple, yet they carried weight, bridging a gap that had existed between them for years. They walked together to the house, the soft crunch of their boots on the gravel, the only sound between them at first. Samuel opened the door and led Ahuli inside, gesturing toward the table where a modest meal had been prepared. There was no grandeur, no attempt to impress, just simple food, warmth from the fireplace, and the invitation to share time together. Ahuli noticed the care in Samuel's preparation, the effort to create a welcoming space. It spoke of thoughtfulness, of someone reaching out despite fear, and it touched him deeply. As they sat, the initial moments were quiet. Samuel poured coffee into 2 mugs, handing one to Ahuli, and the 2 men stared into the flames of the fireplace. The crackling sound filled the silence, creating a rhythm that felt natural, unforced. Samuel took a small bite of bread, then looked at Ahuli. "I sometimes forget what it's like to have someone to talk to," he admitted.
It's been a long time since I shared an evening with another person. Ahuli listened quietly, nodding with understanding. He had known solitude in his own way, though his life had always been connected to his community and family.
"Loneliness is heavy," he said softly. "It can make even the largest home feel small." His words resonated with Samuel, who felt as if someone finally understood the emptiness he carried. The conversation began to flow slowly at first, like a stream finding its path. Samuel shared stories of his ranch, of the challenges and triumphs that came with managing such a large property. He spoke of the animals he cared for, the land he cherished, and the routines that had defined his life for years. Ahuli listened attentively, asking questions, pointing out observations, and sharing insights from his own experiences. The differences in their lives became apparent, but rather than creating distance, these differences sparked curiosity and respect. Ahuli spoke of his people, of traditions that had been passed down through generations, of the lessons learned from the land and animals, and of the values that guided his life. Samuel was fascinated, realizing how little he had understood of the world beyond his ranch. He asked questions, genuinely eager to learn, and Ahuli answered with patience and openness. The exchange was gentle, respectful, and enlightening for both men. As the night deepened, laughter began to fill the room. Samuel had a dry sense of humor that Ahuli appreciated, and Ahuli's quiet wit and keen observations brought smiles and chuckles. For the first time in years, Samuel felt a lightness in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with human connection. The two men shared small stories from their pasts, memories of childhood, moments of pride, and times of struggle. Each story built a bridge between them, connecting them across the gap of culture, background, and experience. The meal was simple, yet it became a symbol of something far greater: the willingness to share, to open one's life to another, and to find companionship where none had existed before. Samuel noticed how the firelight reflected in Ahuli's eyes, seeing both wisdom and kindness there. Ahuli noticed the genuine effort in Samuel's gestures, the careful attention to making the evening comfortable and welcoming. In those moments, they both realized that this connection, fragile and new, was already meaningful. Time seemed to pass differently that night. Hours slipped by unnoticed as conversation continued, filled with laughter, questions, and thoughtful pauses. The walls of the house, once silent and empty, now echoed with life. Samuel felt something shift inside him, a release of the tension and isolation that had weighed so heavily on his heart. Ahuli, too, felt a rare sense of comfort, knowing that this simple act of sharing a meal and stories had created trust and understanding. When the clock in the corner chimed softly, signaling the late hour, neither man was ready for the evening to end. Samuel realized that he had not just invited a neighbor over. He had invited friendship, and the value of that surpassed anything he had gained through wealth or land. Ahuli, sensing the sincerity and openness in Samuel's heart, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had been cautious, but he had taken a step toward connection, and it had been worth it. Before departing, Ahuli stood by the door, looking at Samuel. "Tonight was good," he said simply. "It was more than I expected." Samuel nodded, feeling gratitude swell inside him. "I thank you for coming," he replied. "I've been alone for too long. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to talk to." Ahuli smiled faintly, understanding more than words could express. "Sometimes it takes courage to reach out," he said. "You did, and that made all the difference." With a nod, he mounted his horse and rode off into the night, the sound of hooves fading but leaving a lasting impression. Samuel watched him go, feeling a mixture of relief, hope, and anticipation for the future. As Samuel closed the door behind him, he felt a quiet joy that had been absent from his life for many years. The fire crackled warmly, the house felt less empty, and the night no longer seemed so vast and lonely. He realized that friendship, connection, and understanding could transform even the largest and most isolated home. For the first time in a long while, Samuel looked forward to tomorrow, not just for the work that awaited him, but for the possibility of continuing this new bond. building trust, and sharing life with someone who truly understood him. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch, the distant rustle of animals, the soft sigh of the wind, and the occasional cry of an owl, Samuel felt a calm he had not known in years. Loneliness still lingered, but it was no longer heavy. He had taken a step forward, and in doing so had discovered that even the most solitary life could change with one act of courage and one shared evening. The thought of Ahuli, the conversation, and the laughter they had shared warmed him like a fire, and for the first time, Samuel slept with a sense of hope in his heart. The morning sun rose slowly over the wide open plain, spilling golden light across Samuel's ranch. Birds called from the trees, and the soft murmur of a nearby stream added a gentle rhythm to the awakening land.
Samuel stirred awake, feeling the warmth of the morning light on his face.
He stretched, noticing how quiet the house felt after last night's unusual but comforting company. The memory of Ahuli's visit lingered vividly in his mind. The conversation, the laughter, the quiet moments of understanding. For the first time in a long while, Samuel looked forward to the day ahead, not just as a series of tasks, but as an opportunity to see his neighbor again.
Ahuli, meanwhile, had returned to his own home, riding slowly across the dusty paths that led back to his small settlement.
He had thought carefully about the evening he had shared with Samuel. It was different from anything he had expected. He had gone with caution, unsure of the wealthy cowboy's intentions or temperament. Yet he found sincerity and openness in Samuel that disarmed him. The simple act of sharing a meal, of listening and being heard, had left Ahuli with a sense of calm and curiosity. He wondered what else he might learn from this man, what other stories might be exchanged, and how two such different lives could intersect so meaningfully. That afternoon, Samuel busied himself with the usual work on the ranch. He inspected fences, checked water troughs, and counted the cattle grazing under the sun's warm gaze. But every so often, his thoughts drifted to Ahuli. He thought about the way Ahuli had spoken about his people, his traditions, and his connection to the land. Samuel realized how little he knew about the life beyond his ranch and how much he had missed by staying isolated. The idea of friendship, of genuine companionship, had begun to feel tangible, almost within reach. Around midday, Samuel saw Ahuli approaching the fence line that separated their lands. He was tending to a few goats and moving with his usual calm, measured rhythm. Samuel called out to him, his voice carrying across the open space. "Ahuli, would you like to come over for some coffee?" Ahu! Looked up, a slight smile on his face. He nodded. "Psst. I would," he replied. Without hesitation, he walked over, careful to respect the boundary of Samuel's property, but open to the invitation. Bow. Samuel felt a surge of relief and anticipation. The day had begun, and already the possibility of further connection seemed bright. Once inside, Samuel prepared a simple lunch. There was bread, cheese, and some dried meat from the pantry, along with fresh coffee. He set the table with care, noticing how much effort it took to think about someone else's comfort. Ahuli watched with interest, appreciating the thoughtfulness behind each gesture. It was not about wealth or extravagance. It was about the willingness to create a space where two people could share life openly. As they sat down, conversation flowed naturally, though cautiously at first. Samuel began by asking Ahuli about his day, the routines of his own herd, and the challenges he faced. Ahuli responded with honesty and detail, describing the responsibilities he carried, the knowledge passed down from his elders, and the satisfaction he found in a life tied closely to the land. Samuel listened intently, realizing that there was wisdom in Ahuli's simple, grounded way of living, wisdom that could not be bought, only earned through experience. Gradually, Samuel shared more about his own life. He spoke of his upbringing, his long hours on the ranch, and the pride he felt in the land he had worked so hard to maintain. He did not shy away from admitting his loneliness, the emptiness he had tried to fill with work and wealth. Auli listened without judgment, nodding thoughtfully. He understood what it was to feel isolated, to carry responsibilities that weighed heavily on the heart, and to long for connection despite appearances. As the afternoon passed, the conversation began to deepen. Samuel asked Ahuli about his childhood, about the stories his family had told, and about the lessons learned from living in harmony with nature. Ahuli, in turn, asked Samuel about the choices he had made, the sacrifices he had endured to maintain the ranch, and the moments of joy that had kept him moving forward. Both men realized that despite their different backgrounds, they shared common human experiences: hope, struggle, pride, and a desire for understanding. At one point, Samuel brought out a small notebook filled with sketches of the ranch, maps of the land, and notes about the animals. He showed Ahuli the layout of the fields, the paths of the streams, and the locations of the barns. Ahuli examined the drawings with interest, pointing out places where the land's natural features could be used more efficiently, or where the water supply could be improved. Samuel was impressed by Ahuli's insight, noting how practical and thoughtful his observations were. It was clear that Ahuli's connection to the land was profound and rooted in generations of experience. They spent hours discussing the land, the animals, and the ways in which they could learn from each other. Samuel taught Ahuli about certain ranching techniques he had perfected over the years, and Ahuli shared knowledge about tracking, understanding animal behavior, and reading the land's subtle signs. It became a mutual exchange of skills, a collaboration that went beyond simple conversation. With each story and shared lesson, the trust between them grew stronger. The sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. The changing light created long shadows across the room, and the fire in the hearth cast a gentle glow. Samuel realized that time had passed quickly, that hours of conversation, laughter, and learning had filled the day without him noticing. He felt a sense of fulfillment that had been absent for years, a quiet joy in knowing that he was not alone and that someone understood him. Ahuli, too, felt a shift within himself. The day had been more than he had expected. He had approached cautiously, unsure of Samuel's intentions, and yet he had found openness, kindness, and a willingness to share that was rare and precious. He recognized the importance of these moments, the subtle ways in which understanding and trust could build, the patience required to listen and be heard, and the value of taking the time to connect with another person sincerely. As night fell, Samuel prepared a small supper, and they sat together once more by the fire. The conversation became lighter, filled with humor and gentle teasing. Samuel shared a funny story about one of his more stubborn horses, and Ahuli laughed, recalling a similar experience with his goats. The laughter was easy, unforced, and it filled the room with warmth. For Samuel, it was a revelation. Laughter shared with another person had a way of melting the weight of loneliness, leaving a sense of lightness and contentment that he had not known in years. Later, Samuel suggested that they take a walk outside. The air was cool, and the stars shone brightly overhead, undisturbed by city lights or noise. They moved slowly across the ranch, speaking in soft tones. Samuel pointed out features of the land he loved, and Ahuli responded with observations that made Samuel see his own property in new ways. They spoke of the past, of memories that shaped them, and of hopes for the future. Each step seemed to deepen their understanding of one another, and the quiet companionship of walking side by side brought a comfort neither had anticipated. At the edge of the ranch, they paused to look out over the fields. The moon reflected off a small pond, and the distant hills glowed faintly under the night sky. Samuel felt a sense of peace, the kind that comes not from possessions or wealth, but from shared presence and understanding. Ahuli felt similarly, recognizing that this connection, forged in simple conversation and shared time, was rare and valuable. Despair returning to the house, Samuel realized how much he had learned from Ahuli, not just about the land, but about life itself. Patience, humility, and the ability to listen were lessons that could not be found in books or earned through work. They came from experience and reflection. He felt gratitude for Ahuli's presence, for his willingness to share wisdom and perspective, and for the companionship that had softened the edges of his long isolation. As they prepared to part ways for the night, Samuel felt a warmth that went beyond the fire in the hearth. He knew this was the beginning of something meaningful, a friendship built on trust, curiosity, and mutual respect. "Ah, Huli," sensing the same sincerity, nodded with quiet approval. "Thank you," Samuel said simply. "Today has been important." Ahuli smiled. "It has," he agreed. "And tomorrow there will be more to learn, more to share. We both have much to offer each other." With that, he mounted his horse and rode off into the night, leaving Samuel standing at the doorway, feeling lighter, hopeful, and eager for what the future might bring. That night, as Samuel lay in bed, he thought about the day in detail, the conversations, the laughter, the lessons, and the quiet moments of understanding. He realized that wealth had never been about the land or the animals. It had been about connection, trust, and the willingness to share life with another person. The solitude that had felt so heavy before now seemed bearable, because he knew that friendship could be cultivated, and that even in a vast, lonely world, it was possible to find someone who truly understood him. The moon shone brightly outside his window, casting silvery light across the room. Samuel closed his eyes, feeling gratitude for the unexpected bond that had begun to grow. Loneliness still lingered, but it was no longer a burden. It was simply a space waiting to be filled with friendship, stories, and shared experiences. He fell asleep with a sense of calm and anticipation, knowing that the next day would bring another chance to learn, to laugh, and to deepen a connection that promised to transform his life in ways he had long thought impossible. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, spilling golden light across Samuel's fields. The air was fresh and filled with the scent of earth, hay, and wild flowers that grew along the edges of the land. Samuel stepped onto the porch, taking a deep breath and feeling something he had not felt in a long time: anticipation. Today was another day, and he knew it would not be like any other. Last night had been the start of something new, a connection that was slowly reshaping his world. He looked out across the hills and thought of Ahuli, the Apache neighbor who had come into his life and, in ways Samuel could not yet fully describe, had begun to fill the emptiness he had carried for so many years. Ahuli was already tending to his animals, moving with his usual calm and confidence. He noticed Samuel watching him from the porch and offered a slight nod. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. A shared understanding, a mutual respect. Ahuli had reflected on their first evening and the conversations that followed. He realized that friendship was not always about grand gestures. It was about consistency, presence, and the willingness to listen and share. And so, he had decided that he would visit Samuel again, knowing that even small moments together could build something lasting. By mid-morning, Samuel had completed his usual chores and was preparing a modest breakfast when he heard the familiar sound of hooves on the gravel. Ahuli approached the ranch house carrying a small bundle of herbs and dried fruits. Samuel greeted him warmly, feeling a genuine happiness at seeing his neighbor. "Good morning," Samuel said, smiling. "I thought we could share breakfast before the work of the day begins." Ahuli returned the smile. "I would like that," he said. He set the bundle on the table, and Samuel examined it with curiosity. The herbs were aromatic, and the dried fruits were carefully preserved. "These are from my home," Ahuli explained. "I thought they might be useful for breakfast, or for the meals you prepare here." Samuel felt a deep appreciation for the thoughtfulness, recognizing that Ahuli's gesture was not just about food. It was about connection and care. They ate together, sharing simple food and enjoying the morning light that poured through the windows. Conversation flowed easily, filled with questions, reflections, and laughter. Samuel spoke about the ranch work ahead, while Ahuli offered insights from his own experience, suggesting ways to improve irrigation, tend to the animals more efficiently, and even manage the land in ways that would benefit both of their herds. Samuel was struck by Ahuli's knowledge, realizing that it was rooted in generations of observation and experience, a wisdom that could not be bought or taught, only lived. After breakfast, they set out together to the fields. Samuel rode his horse while Ahuli walked alongside, occasionally pointing out areas of interest, small details that Samuel had overlooked for years. They examined fences, water sources, and grazing patterns, discussing not only the practical aspects but also the philosophies behind them. Ahuli spoke of balance with the land, of observing the natural signs, and of respecting the cycles of nature. Samuel, who had always focused on efficiency and productivity, found himself learning something entirely new. He realized that the land could teach lessons beyond ranching, lessons about patience, humility, and harmony. By midday, they had finished inspecting the fields, and Samuel suggested taking a break. They sat under the shade of a large tree near a small creek, letting the gentle sound of water soothe their minds. Samuel felt a sense of peace that he had not known in years, a feeling that went beyond comfort. It was the warmth of companionship, the reassurance of mutual understanding. Ahuli too felt contentment, appreciating the quiet strength that came from shared time and effort. As they rested, their conversation turned to stories of the past. Samuel spoke of his childhood, of lessons learned from his parents, and of the challenges he had faced in building the ranch. Ahuli shared tales of his ancestors, of traditions, ceremonies, and the wisdom passed down through generations. They listened intently to one another, asking questions, expressing curiosity, and discovering common ground. Though their lives had been vastly different, they recognized shared human experiences, the struggles of responsibility, the joys of accomplishment, and the yearning for connection. Later, Samuel led Ahuli to the barn where they worked together to tend the horses and cattle. Samuel taught Ahuli some techniques for managing the larger herd, while Ahuli shared methods for understanding animal behavior that Samuel had never considered. The collaboration was seamless, built on mutual respect and a willingness to learn. By the time the work was done, Samuel felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond the completion of chores. It was the fulfillment of working alongside someone who truly understood the value of diligence, care, and patience. As evening approached, Samuel and Ahuli sat once more by the fire in the house. The warm glow illuminated their faces, creating a cozy, inviting atmosphere. They shared stories from the day, laughed at small mishaps, and reflected on what they had learned from each other. Samuel realized that wealth, land, and material success had brought him comfort but not fulfillment. True richness, he now understood, came from connection, from trust, and from the simple act of sharing life with another person. Ahuli, too, reflected on the day. He had entered Samuel's home with caution and respect, unsure of how the cowboy might respond to his presence. Yet he had found sincerity, patience, and a willingness to learn. The evening had reinforced his belief that friendship could transcend differences in culture, background, and lifestyle. It was not about similarities. It was about openness, respect, and the courage to reach out. Over the following days, their routine grew. Ahuli visited regularly, helping with the ranch work, sharing meals, and exchanging stories. Samuel found himself anticipating these visits, feeling a sense of excitement and fulfillment that had been absent for so long. They explored the land together, discussing strategies for improvement, learning from one another and appreciating the natural beauty around them. With each shared experience, their friendship deepened, built on mutual respect, curiosity, and understanding. One afternoon, Samuel invited Ahuli to explore a distant part of the ranch, a stretch of hills and valleys that Samuel had rarely visited. As they rode together, the vastness of the landscape seemed to mirror the vast potential of their friendship. They spoke of hopes, fears, and dreams, realizing that trust and connection could grow in unexpected ways. Huli shared insights about the terrain, predicting where water might collect after rain and where grazing would be best. Samuel in turn shared his plans for future improvements and asked for Ahuli's advice, valuing his perspective in a way he had never valued anyone's opinion before. As days turned into weeks, their bond became more profound. Samuel learned the importance of humility and patience, while Ahuli experienced the satisfaction of working alongside someone who respected his knowledge and traditions. Together, they bridged a gap that had once seemed unbridgeable, finding common ground in shared effort, conversation, and laughter. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel and Ahuli sat on a hill overlooking the ranch. The sky was painted with shades of red, pink, and gold, reflecting off the water of a small pond below. Samuel felt a sense of quiet gratitude, realizing how far he had come from the loneliness that had once consumed him. Sensing the depth of Samuel's reflection, offered a simple observation. "We have built something here," he said softly. "Not just fences or fields, but trust and friendship. That is stronger than anything else." Samuel nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest. "You're right," he replied. "I have everything I could ever own, but I never understood what I truly needed until you came into my life."
It is not land or wealth that matters most. It is connection, understanding, and the willingness to share life with another person.
The night grew quiet, and the stars filled the sky with their gentle light. Samuel and Ahuli continued to sit in companionable silence, feeling the peace that comes from being understood and accepted. Samuel realized that his life had changed in ways he had never imagined. The isolation that had once seemed permanent had been softened by trust and friendship. He no longer felt the heavy weight of loneliness because he had found someone who saw him, listened to him, and valued him for who he truly was.
As they prepared to part for the night, Samuel offered Ahuli a place to stay whenever he wished.
"You are welcome here," he said sincerely, "not just as a neighbor, but as a friend. You have made this house feel alive in a way I never thought possible." Ahuli smiled, touched by the gesture. "And you have shown me that friendship can cross any boundary," he replied. "I am grateful for this bond and I will cherish it." Over the weeks and months that followed, Samuel and Ahuli's friendship continued to grow. They shared meals, worked the land, told stories, and celebrated small victories together. Samuel became more patient, more humble, and more appreciative of life beyond wealth and possessions. Ahuli found joy in teaching, learning, and simply being present with someone who truly cared. The two men, once strangers from different worlds, had discovered a shared humanity that neither expected but both valued deeply. One evening, as they watched the sun set behind the distant hills, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them together. He thought of the loneliness that had once consumed him, the hesitation he had felt in reaching out, and the courage it took to invite Ahuli into his home. He realized that true richness was not measured in acres of land, herds of cattle, or stacks of money. It was measured in trust, understanding, and the willingness to open one's heart to another person. Ahuli, standing beside him, looked at the horizon with quiet satisfaction. He understood that friendship, patience, and mutual respect could bridge even the widest gaps. Together they had built something enduring, a bond that transcended culture, background, and circumstance. It was a friendship rooted in honesty, shared experiences, and the simple joy of connection. That night, as the stars shone over the ranch, both men felt a profound sense of contentment. Loneliness was no longer a shadow in Samuel's life, and Ahuli had found a companion who valued his wisdom and presence. In the quiet of the night, surrounded by the land they both loved, they knew that this bond would endure, a testament to the power of courage, openness, and the human need for connection.